Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, I'm going to do another recap of my trips for Nuffield in Europe, and today will be Sweden and Ireland. Hey everyone, before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to take a second to thank our sponsors, Bank Barn. I love these guys and what they're doing to streamline banking in agriculture. They're helping to connect farmers and lenders so that today's farmers have more options no matter the size of operation. Check out bankbarn.io to learn more. Just before I get started in what I actually did here, I just want to say I've been in a lot of European cities now. I've been in London, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Paris, Munich, Berlin, Copenhagen, and now Stockholm. And I would have to say Stockholm is probably one of my favorite cities out of all of those. I like the history that you find in some of the other cities. There's a lot of history here in Stockholm. And it's just really unique because it's on an archipelago, which is a grouping of islands. So the city is made up of a whole bunch of islands, and it's just got a really neat vibe to it because of that. And it's a very beautiful city, very clean city. So I would highly recommend Stockholm if you're looking for a neat city in Europe to go visit. Now, one of the reasons why I decided to come to Sweden for my visit was because it is the home of the largest dairy equipment manufacturer in the world, called DeLaval. So if you're in the dairy industry, you've heard of DeLaval. If you're not in the dairy industry, you've probably heard of DeLaval. So Gustav DeLaval invented the cream separator in 1883. So what is that? 140 years ago, he invented that. So that's what he was really known for. That's what put him on the map. But in 1894, he invested and built up a dairy farm in Tumba, Sweden here. It's where today is the headquarters of DeLaval. And I had the privilege of meeting with Paul Lofgren, who is the CEO of DeLaval, for almost the entire day with two of his great team members, Robert, who is in charge of the AI digital team, and Carl Oscar, who is in charge of milk extraction. So this is the first time that I really had a chance to dive deep into what is going on with AI in being able to milk the cow more efficiently. Really enjoyed that aspect of conversation with Carl that I had. I just want to say I really appreciate Paul Lofgren and his team and what they're willing to share with me. I'm not going to share a lot of it here because some of it might be a little sensitive yet, but they were very open with me, and I really appreciate that for my study topic that I'm going to be presenting on for Nuffield on artificial intelligence. So one of the big topics that I discuss pretty much everywhere I go is bringing in data, collecting data, and storing data, and transforming data, right? So that's a very important aspect of artificial intelligence and computer learning models. So DeLaval has a company called Dairy Data Warehouse that we discussed a lot of how they store, clean, and package data into usable forms for people in the industry, such as myself, to be able to use that to make a decision on something. We also had a good discussion on DeLaval's position in the dairy sector and how they compare to competitors like DeLaval and what they're really focused on moving forward. They're really, really focused on continuing to be able to milk the cow more efficiently and help dairy farmers effectively manage things at the cow level. So again, that was one of the reasons we talked so much about the technologies and things that are being developed to milk cows more efficiently, more comfortably for the cow, and quicker as well. They're adapting those things onto their robot technology, especially because the faster that you can milk a cow in the robot, the more cows you can put on a robot, and it brings the cost per cow of that robot down. And one thing that Paul Lofgren was very excited to discuss was the Milk Sustainability Center initiative that DeLaval partnered with John Deere on, and that's just coming out right now. And so if you're interested in checking that out, just type it in Google, Milk Sustainability Center, DeLaval, or John Deere, and you'll find that. So they're really looking at how do we take data and model that for sustainability initiatives from the field all the way through the production side of the cow, and having one place to keep track of that and to be able to build a system that'll be effective and simplify all of the data collection and data reporting that's needed for a lot of these sustainability initiatives that are out there. There's a couple of things that I really appreciated about my visit at DeLaval and gave me a lot of respect for DeLaval as a company. As we met on the dairy farm, the DeLaval dairy farm, that was started in 1894 by Gustav DeLaval, which is right across the valley from the headquarters where all of the engineers, all of the accounting people for DeLaval sit. Beautiful, beautiful farm overlooking the valley, and they still use it today. They're actually investing a lot of money into it today. That we were able to see the construction of a new robot facility that they're building on site to milk, I believe it was up to 500 cows on that site. So not only did I appreciate having the meeting at the farm and seeing that they're at the farm, but pretty much everyone that works at DeLaval has to milk cows on that farm at some point in time. And that just instills a culture of it's about the cows. The other thing that I really appreciated about my trip to the DeLaval farm was Paul let me into their building of history that they have there. And they really have an appreciation for where the company came from. And we got to see some of the inventions that Gustav DeLaval came up with. One of my favorites, you'll have to check it out. I'll have it on my social media feeds of my trip to Sweden. But he invented something that looks like a milking robot arm today in 1894. And it was on a shaft that you could spin. And it was not unlike what you would see today on a milking robot. It was incredible to see. So there's a lot of other inventions that he had in there. Take a look at those pictures. But again, I just really thought it was neat how they appreciate where they came from as a company and where the industry, the dairy industry, has come from hand milking to the first milking systems that were available, to bucket milkers, to pipelines, to parlors, and now to robots. So it was really cool to see that progression and to see their appreciation for where we came from. So in wrapping that up, I just want to say thank you to Paul Lofgren and his team at DeLaval. They were very, very gracious hosts, took a lot of time with me. Just really appreciate their insights for my project at Nuffield. So my next visit in Sweden was with somebody that you might know if you've listened to my podcast for a while, Linda McDonald, who was on an episode pretty much at the beginning of when I started this podcast. So go back and listen to that episode. It's very insightful. She's probably the most humble, well-connected person that I've ever met. She seems to know everybody in the industry, but just very caring and wants to make an impact for the world, which is great to see. So Linda works for a company called Tetra Pak, which is located in Sweden, which is another part of the group of DeLaval. So it's Alfa Laval is the parent company, and DeLaval is one of the companies in that suite, as well as Tetra Pak. So Linda works for the Tetra Pak arm, which is mostly in packaging and processing side of the dairy chain. So it's interesting to see what she does with helping develop things like school milk programs in countries all around the world, and also setting up dairy advisory teams all around the world to help in developing countries where they need resources to really step up their game in production to supply the demand that's in those countries. Now, with Linda, I had the opportunity to watch a new documentary about dairy farming and sustainability that's coming out. It's going to be a pretty big deal, I think. I'm planning on having the writers and the producers of that documentary on my podcast at some point. So I'm not going to spill the beans and tell you what it is. It hasn't been released yet. So I really felt honored to be able to watch that The other cool part was I think there was 4 previous guests of my podcast that were on that documentary. So it's really cool to see we've had some of the very best in the industry on this podcast. I really enjoyed the conversations that I was able to have with Linda as we discussed things from bringing new people into agriculture and getting people excited about being farmers again, to how food programs work around the world and how government policy can really make an impact on nutrition and farms and profitability of farms and sustainability, environmental aspects. So we had a wide range of conversation. Really enjoyed my time that I was able to spend with her. So thank you, Linda, if you're listening, for that opportunity in that meeting. I just want to say Sweden is definitely a place that's on my list to come back to, and really enjoyed my time here, even though it was very short. Just really enjoyed being here and getting to see what's going on here in the dairy industry. It's a small country in dairy around the world, but there's a lot that happens here that affects dairy.
All right, for this segment of the episode, as you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm back in my office here at my farm in Michigan. And this part is going to be for the final destination of my tour in Europe. The month-long tour that I was on ended in Ireland. Yep, I'm back in Ireland. I was there this spring as part of my Global Focus program with my Nuffield group that I was with. And at that point, we were touring Northern Ireland. And I think every single day that we were there, it rained and it was pretty cold. This time, it was the exact opposite. And everyone said in Ireland that was very peculiar weather that we were having. It was beautiful, mid 20 degrees Celsius, mid 70 degrees, high 70 degrees Fahrenheit for temperature. And it was sunny every single day I was there. So it was just beautiful weather. I had the chance to see some really cool sights, went to the Cliffs of Moher, and just drove around pretty much everywhere south of where I was the first time I was there. So if you look at a map of Ireland, if you draw a line straight west from Dublin, I was just a touch north of Dublin was my first stop, and then everywhere else was across and south of Dublin. So I got to tour the southern part of the country. My first stop was the president of Nuffield, Ireland, who has a dairy farm, and I got to stay with him and his wife. We actually had dinner with them the last night, one of the last nights we were in Ireland with my Global Focus tour group. This time I got to see his farm and talk with him about his business and how they expanded it over a number of years. It's quite a large dairy farm for Ireland. So his name is Joe Leonard, and Joe and his brother operate the farm, and they milk, I believe it was about 600 cows, which is quite substantial. The average herd size in Ireland is about 90 cows for a dairy farm. So I'll touch more on that later as I talk about another visit that I had. But going on from Joe's farm, the first morning that I was there, I had the privilege of visiting the Alltech Ireland, which is their European headquarters. And Alltech is a company that many of you know if you're in the livestock business. Their world headquarters is out of Kentucky. And they're a very innovative company, mostly around technology in the feed ingredient space for many different classes of livestock. And got to meet with the global VP of ESG for Alltech, which had some very interesting viewpoints that she brought up on the differences between consumers and farmers in the U.S. market versus Europe, and how they are quite different. And we talked about some of those differences and how that impacts how they go to market with how they sell products in the U.S. Their strategy around sustainability is different when they're talking to producers in the U.S. and consumers in the U.S. than when they're talking to producers and people in Europe. And we are going to touch a little bit more on that. I know I've talked about that in some of the previous wrap-up episodes that I've had, but we're going to touch a little bit more on that here as well. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to Alltech. That was a great visit. They had several of their key team members in Europe, as well as their country head for Ireland that ran the whole Irish business. It was great to talk to him about the local things going on with Alltech, what they're focused on for a feed additive standpoint, and their business that they have, feed mixing and feed software business that they have. And if you're in the dairy business around the world, you might know that company as Keenan. They've been around for a long time. It's an Irish company originally that was bought out by Alltech a number of years ago. So my next visit was to David Kerr's dairy farm. And that town that he was outside of is called Port Liege. Port Liege, I believe that's how you pronounce it. And I was kind of just expecting to stop in and quick see his place. And he invited me to stay overnight and stay with them and their family at their farm. And it ended up being probably one of the coolest visits that I got a lot out of being there with David. I don't know if he knew that or not. I think he did at the end of our time there, but ended up being with him for, I believe it was 3 days out of my trip, 2.5 days, over the course of 3 different days that I was with him. I was able to go to the plowing championships, which if anyone knows big farm shows in the world, the plowing championships in Ireland are the biggest outdoor farm show that they have, one of the biggest outdoor farm shows in Europe. And that was pretty cool to see that and spend a day there. They had an ag tech building there that I went to see the different companies that were presenting new things in ag tech, which was along the lines of my topic, studying for Nuffield. And it was really neat to see they had a competition there of all the different ag tech companies and the new products that they were releasing. Kind of like almost like a Shark Tank type pitch session that they offered with some feedback. And one of the other 2024 Nuffield Scholars from Ireland was presenting at that. So that was really cool to see him present. That's Nick Cotter. He and his family have a business in sheep handling equipment and other technologies around the sheep industry. So getting back to David Kerr's farm, one of the really interesting opportunities that I had there was he got a call, really short notice, from the president of the Irish Farmers Association, which in the U.S., if you're listening to this from the U.S., is kind of like our National Farm Bureau. And they were hosting a contingency of European Union environmental commissioners. They're looking for a dairy farm to go on to talk about one of the biggest topics that was being talked about while I was in Ireland, which is the removal of the Irish derogation on nitrogen usage and nitrogen load. So I'll get more into that in a second about what that is. But David is very well respected, very humble guy, but well respected in the industry. And that's why they called him. And I had the privilege of being there when the contingency came to his farm the next morning and being a part of that, and even having a little bit of time to talk about what I had learned on my month-long trip in Europe and things from my perspective as an American. So the derogation, I do believe I touched on it potentially in the Netherlands wrap-up. I'm not 100% sure. Sorry if you've already heard this, but the derogation, there's a couple of countries in the EU. There were the Netherlands and then Ireland. I think those were the main two that had the opportunity to go outside of the EU's official nitrogen load regulations that were put on the different countries around the EU to deal with the nitrate issues that they were having. Now, one of the reasons Ireland had the derogation or this exemption from the limitation is because of the system that they run. They're very grass-based in their dairy systems and their beef systems as well. They're a lot less confined animal feeding operations there. The majority of the time, cows are out on grass on the vast majority of operations in Ireland. That's how they're competitive. They grow good grass, great grass actually, like New Zealand, like Uruguay. Very few areas of the world that can grow grass like Ireland and those other countries. So that's their competitive advantage. And that's how they can make cheap milk and have a viable farm on a small number of cows. Like I said, the average herd size in Ireland is 90 cows. David's herd size is 140 cows. And so the derogation, there is a cap, a nitrogen cap in Ireland. It's much higher than some of the other countries, and they're looking right now at lowering that. The EU is going to be requiring Ireland to lower that potentially. That was why they were coming out to look at the farms and see what type of impact it would have and why Ireland should still continue to have the derogation potentially. So right now, like David could use a stocking density of his cows at 220 kgs of nitrogen per hectare. They're looking at lowering that to 170 kgs stocking density. So if you do the math on those numbers, basically, if the derogation were taken away from Irish dairy farmers, they would have to destock their farms by 25% or by 25% bigger land bases, which is very difficult in Ireland to buy land. It does not change hands very often, and it would be very difficult to expand that way. So this is a big question that's out there right now that's going to really hinder growth potential in Ireland moving forward in the future. And one of the big frustrations that a lot of the dairy farmers had was when Ireland joined the EU, they not long after that, they had quotas implemented on the amount of milk that they could produce. But there's a lot of built up potential of production that was available in Ireland to make good, cheap milk for the world market and for the EU. And as soon as those quotas went away, which means everything went to a free market in 2015, Ireland expanded like crazy in their dairy because it was a profitable business. So a lot of land use switched from beef and sheep production into dairy, and dairy farms expanded at that time. So that was one thing that a lot of dairy farmers mentioned was they've built this infrastructure, they've built their business models around that expansion over the last 9 years now. And now they're having to face destocking by 25%. Well, a lot of them leveraged up, borrowed heavily to expand and have the opportunity to continue to grow. And now they're looking at having to scale back a system that they've already invested in. So there's a lot of contention around this issue. I guess I'll just leave it at that. It's a very interesting discussion with the folks from the EU that were there from the commission. But one thing that I did enjoy seeing on David's farm that I know everyone else did as well is a few years back during COVID, David's father passed away. And one way he wanted to honor his father, since they weren't able to have a proper memorial service for him, was through doing something on the farm. So he took a few acres. Again, land in Ireland is very valuable, just like most of the other developed countries in the world. But he decided to take some of that land on their farm and turn it into a nature area. So he dug a pond in a peat bog area and planted some vegetation around that. Really made it a beautiful spot where he enjoys going to sit and just enjoy nature. And I think that really speaks a lot about David as a person. He's willing to, even in his business, he was very good with his business. His topic that he studied for Nuffield back in 2006 when he was a scholar was really being efficient on his farming operation, trying to make everything a one-person job so that way he could be efficient, be profitable, but also have a nice lifestyle. And that's been a big focus of his. And he's just been enjoying life and doing some other things around the farm. He's got Airbnb, the house that his father had on the farm. He's turning into an Airbnb and just enjoying rediscovering things that he didn't know he liked doing. So it's really great to be around David from that perspective to see your operation doesn't need to always be completely focused on a financial metric. That's what I got out of it is, what do you want your business to do for you? It's there to serve you, not to hit a number. Yes, you need to be profitable in order to continue on as a business, but what are you going to use that profitability for? And he was very big on keeping things very simple. He said, yes, I could invest in this or change my management to do this, but then it affects this and this, which is going to make me have to work way more or have to hire somebody else to do those things. And he just was really driven on keeping things simple, yet profitable. So he could enjoy what he's doing. And I had a lot of admiration for that. And that was, a visit that I was not expecting. It lasted almost 3 days, and really enjoyed that, ending my trip that way. And then I went to 2 other farms, John Crowley's and his nephew, Stephen, and they showed me around their farm. They milked about 180 cows right on a beautiful river in the very southern part of the country. And they had just invested quite substantially in a new parlor, a new manure lagoon, new winter housing. So it was interesting to see. That was really probably the first dairy that I saw that had expanded and reinvested into their facilities as I had gone around Ireland, that had done it in the last year or two. And they had a very nice operation. Stephen was coming in. He's the nephew. He's coming in, made this his business, and it was interesting to see what he was doing to take it on and make it successful for the future. Now, the other thing that I got to see there was John showed me the financials. So before they did this expansion, they had a beef operation on part of the farm and a smaller dairy operation. And it was really interesting to see the profitability of beef in Ireland. It was very poor. And actually, most years it was negative. And to see what that did to the dairy operation when they turned that land and changed that land use into dairy pastures rather than beef pastures, it made the whole operation way more profitable and allowed that reinvestment for the next generation to come and make it a viable long-term business. So I really appreciate John showing me the books, because I'm a numbers guy. I really get a lot out of seeing the financials and the impacts that systems changes can have on the financials of a business. After I left John's place, the next farm I went to was Jim Mulhall, which is also a dairy farm. Jim's operation is very different than most of the dairy operations in Ireland. It's completely confinement operation, and it was all robotics. So that was the only robot dairy that I had been to in Ireland. And he also talked about how they were very close to town. I mean, they're basically right up at the edge of town. And they decided to invest, believe it was 4 or 5 years ago now, and go all to robots and really focus on more of a high production, almost like a US or Central Europe, Canadian style production management. Now, I really admired Jim's push to go against the grain and do something that very few people in the country were doing, with a total confinement operation year round. And he had great reasons for doing it, made sense business-wise for him and his family. And as I said a few minutes ago, Ireland is known for their grass-based systems. That's what keeps them competitive. So it was really interesting to see how Jim made it work to be a complete confinement operation. It is possible. It did work for him in the situation that he was in. So it goes to show that there's always an exception to the rule. And I think that's really important to see as you travel around the world, that you don't always just look at what is the norm in that area, but look for the outliers as well and see what's making them successful. What are they doing that they can be successful as an outlier? All right. Now, my last stop in Ireland was to Brian and Anna Marie's Flanagan's dairy farm. Yep, one more dairy farm. Sorry if you are not a dairy farmer on this episode, but that's what I did in Ireland. They had an absolutely gorgeous farm on a hillside overlooking a big valley with farms as far as you could see. My host family that I had in New Zealand had this couple, the Flanagans, working for them for a few years. And then they moved back to Ireland and built this dairy completely from the ground up. So they built the entire infrastructure on this piece of land that was in their family. And they've been able to expand. Really interesting to see, once the neighbors saw that they were successful, that they wanted to continue to grow their business. They had several neighbors come to them with the opportunity for long-term leases on blocks of land that were adjoining theirs. So they were able to make a bigger continuous farm. Again, this is a grass-based system, so it's very important to have that continuous land base. And they had just continued to add and add and add land bases as neighboring blocks came available for long-term lease. So that's how they put their business together. I thought, again, that was a really interesting model and opportunity that they've had to grow their business. And it was a great way to end the trip. So from there, I flew home, and I think it was the day after I got home, we started corn silage harvest. So that was a really whirlwind trip, almost a month long, going around Europe and then coming home, getting right into harvest. Now we're working on getting manure hauled for the fall. It's been beautiful weather here in Michigan. I'm very thankful for that. But some of the other big trip takeaways, just seeing everything throughout all of the countries that I visited. I went to UK, I went to Netherlands, I went to Denmark, Sweden, and then Ireland. So 5 different countries. If you include Wales being a separate country, 6. And a couple of the big takeaways that I had was concern for food security in Europe for the long term. And there was a lot of push toward environmental sustainability, but I did not see a really big push toward farm sustainability as a business for the long term, or a focus on food security. There is starting to be some talk about that now. I think they're realizing that if they push the environmental regulations too far, and that's all they're focusing on, especially on the climate change issue, is they are going to be shooting themselves in the foot as a block of nations in food security. So that was a big one that really hit me was, wow, this area of the world that used to be a breadbasket of the world that was exporting product, I think in the next decade could potentially be a net importer of a lot of these products that they've been exporting. So too early to see where that's going to end up yet, but they're on a path that I think me as a dairy farmer in the US can learn from as I talk to legislators and other people in the industry on the impacts of regulations. And a lot of times you change one thing, you make one regulatory change, and it impacts a lot of other things down the chain that you didn't foresee, unforeseen circumstances that happen that make farm businesses not viable for the future. And that was the other big takeaway around that I had was a lot of the countries that I've been to, since there's a lot of this regulatory destabilization in the last 5 to 8 years in Europe, I could see there hadn't been much investment since that time of really regulatory instability. And that is concerning because the longer that goes, the less viable those operations are. And why is that they hadn't been very excited to invest in their businesses was because if you're making a long-term financial decision, which a lot of purchases on a farm are, right? You're looking at maybe a 5 or probably more like a 10 or 20 year investment. If you don't know if you're going to be in business because of how regulations are going to change in the next 3 years, you're not going to make an investment, or you're not going to want to risk the equity that you have to make an investment that might be completely obsolete before that investment is fully realized. So I think that's a word of caution that I want to give to people that are in policymaking roles or talking to their politicians. Make sure you help them understand the impact that regulations can have on our industry, because we have such long time horizons and such small margins. We can't flex like other industries can, like tech can, All right. So I just want to wrap this up. I really enjoyed my time going around Europe, learning from so many people. Thank you to everybody that hosted me and that allowed me to talk with you, see your farms. I really appreciate all of you in making this experience what it was. And I want to thank most of all my wife back home. She did a great job holding down the fort and taking care of our family and watching over the farm, and my farm staff here as well. Thank you so much. I could not have done this trip and made it successful without you guys. So I just want to say thank you for that. So as always, if you've enjoyed this episode, or enjoyed any of our episodes, please share them with somebody you know. That's how we grow this. And until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast. Thanks for listening.